if you don't play now, you're not going to play at all. You need to go on right now. And I'm like,
Carlos Santana approached guitar playing in a unique way that set him apart from most musicians of his era. While many guitarists focused on technical speed and flashy performances, Santana searched for something deeper and more spiritual in his music. His guitar became a voice that communicated prayers and ancient mysteries, rather than simply producing impressive sounds. The common understanding of Santana's career often misses an important point about his intentions and philosophy. Santana never aimed to become a conventional guitar hero in the traditional sense. His goal was to serve as a bridge, connecting different worlds, cultures, and spiritual dimensions through his music. Before his legendary performance at Woodstock brought him international fame, he was a young person in Tijuana, listening to records that represented vastly different musical traditions. He absorbed everything from jazz to blues, from Latin rhythms to African drumming patterns, and from classical guitar to electric distortion. Where others saw boundaries between musical styles, Santana saw endless opportunities for creative combination. The albums that influenced him during his formative years were revolutionary precisely because they broke conventional rules. Santana played music not to gain approval from critics or audiences, but to reach transcendent states where sound transforms into profound experience. 7 particular albums taught him that fusion was not merely a musical genre, but a complete philosophy of life and art. These recordings showed him that the guitar should not be used primarily for technical display, but rather as an instrument for healing, creating connections between people, and making love tangible through sound. The first transformative album in Santana's musical education was John Coltrane's A Love Supreme from 1965. This recording was fundamentally different from rock music of that era. Coltrane created it as a spiritual offering and a conversation with higher powers. When Santana heard this album as a teenager, he immediately grasped its profound meaning. Coltrane demonstrated that music could function as worship, and that a saxophone could serve as a direct channel to the divine. Santana realized that if Coltrane could achieve this with a horn, he could do the same with his guitar strings. The album consisted of 4 movements titled Acknowledgement, Resolution, Pursuance, and Psalm. These were not conventional songs, but rather stages in a spiritual journey. Coltrane was searching, crying out, and surrendering through his music. His saxophone did not simply play melodies, but channeled deep yearning and spiritual hunger. Santana absorbed this with his entire being, feeling the urgency and desperate desire to touch something beyond the physical world. What affected Santana most deeply was Coltrane's total commitment to the spiritual journey. The music was not created for entertainment purposes, but for transformation. Coltrane played as though reaching the other side was a matter of life and death. Santana wanted to bring that same intensity and fearless vulnerability to his own playing. Coltrane taught him that music could be a conversation with infinity. This lesson influenced every note Santana would play throughout his career, evident in his sustained tones and the way he allows notes to linger in the air. His refusal to rush through moments requiring reverence came directly from this influence. For Santana, A love supreme was not merely an influence, but a spiritual awakening that taught him the guitar could function as an altar where he made musical offerings. Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain from 1960 provided another crucial lesson in musical fusion. Most people had never heard of this Hungarian jazz guitarist, but his album created something hypnotic that moved between Eastern and Western musical traditions without settling completely in either. Santana discovered this recording during his early San Francisco years, and it fundamentally changed his understanding of the guitar's expressive potential. Sabo played with a floating modal quality, where melodies seemed to drift rather than march forward. The track Gypsy Queen particularly influenced Santana's musical DNA, and he would later record his own version. However, he first studied Sabo's original obsessively, learning how Sabo used space and how his notes seemed to ask questions rather than make declarations. Every phrase contained mystery, with nothing spelled out directly and everything merely suggested. Sabo's cultural fluidity captivated Santana. Born in Hungary, trained in jazz and incorporating Eastern scales and gypsy traditions, Sabo refused categorization. His guitar spoke multiple languages within a single solo. Santana, navigating his own identity between Mexican roots and American rock, found a kindred spirit. Sabo showed him that wandering musically did not mean being lost. The guitar did not need aggressive announcement. It could seduce, float, and suggest journeys without providing maps. This album taught Santana that subtlety possessed its own strength, and that invitation was more powerful than assertion. Gypsy 66 became the template for Santana's explorations into world music. Jimi Hendrix's Electric Ladyland from 1968 represented another transformative influence. Hendrix did not simply play guitar, but seemed to become one with his instrument, dissolving into it and emerging as pure electricity. When Santana heard this double album, he felt both inspired and humbled. Hendrix had taken the guitar to places Santana had never imagined, into outer space, into the subconscious, and into dimensions that defied naming.
Tracks like Voodoo Child, All Along the Watchtower, and Crosstown Traffic showed how Hendrix treated the recording studio like an alchemist's laboratory. Effects pedals became brushes, and feedback became texture as he painted with sound. Santana realized the guitar did not need to follow any existing template. Hendrix proved that inventing an entirely new musical language was possible. However, what struck Santana most deeply was not the technical wizardry, but the emotion underneath. Hendrix was not showing off, but communicating something urgent and desperate. Behind all the distortion and chaos was vulnerability and pain. Hendrix played as though trying to break through to another realm, and Santana understood that hunger. Electric Ladyland taught Santana about possibility. The album demolished limits and showed that rock, blues, funk, and psychedelia could all coexist. One could honor tradition while simultaneously destroying it. Hendrix made Santana braver. After hearing this album, Santana stopped worrying whether his fusion experiments made conventional sense. Hendrix had proven that following instincts was the only rule that truly mattered. Tito Puente's Dance Mania from 1958 provided the rhythmic heartbeat for Santana's music. This album was pure Afro-Cuban fire, featuring timbales, congas, and brass sections exploding in synchronized joy. This was not background music, but a celebration of survival, with rhythm functioning as religion.
For Santana, who grew up surrounded by these sounds, dance mania reminded him of his identity beneath the rock and roll surface. Tracks like Ran Can Kan, Hong Kong Mambo, and Complication featured arrangements that were mathematically precise, yet loose in execution. Everything was syncopated, layered, and alive. Santana absorbed the polyrhythms and the way multiple percussion instruments could engage in complex conversations. He wanted that same intricacy and depth of groove in rock music. What made Dance Mania essential was its refusal to simplify. This was not watered-down Latin music for American audiences, but the authentic tradition, dense, sophisticated, and demanding. Puente never apologized for complexity, but celebrated it. Santana carried that pride into his own music, refusing to dilute his Latin influences to make rock fans more comfortable. Puente reminded him that rhythm was sacred, not just a backdrop for solos or something to keep time. Rhythm was the foundation, the pulse, and the connection to ancestry. Dance Mania taught Santana that rock and roll needed more than standard four-on-the-floor drumming. It required the complexity of his heritage. And that album became the percussion backbone of everything he would create. Peter Green's Then Play On with Fleetwood Mac from 1969 offered a different kind of lesson. Before Fleetwood Mac became a stadium pop phenomenon, they were a blues band, and Peter Green was their quiet genius. This album displayed something Santana immediately recognized: emotion without ego. Green played guitar as though quietly confessing sins, with intimacy, and a tone so pure it seemed to come from inside the listener's chest. Tracks like Oh Well, Rattlesnake Shake, and Like Crying showed how Green's solos were economical, never wasting notes. Every bend meant something, and every sustained note carried weight. Santana studied Green's phrasing obsessively, learning how Green let notes breathe and found melody in the smallest spaces. This was blues without bravado, honest and unguarded. What separated Green from other British blues guitarists was his tone, which was warm, round, and almost vocal in quality. He did not assault listeners with volume, but invite them closer, making them lean in. Santana wanted that same intimacy and ability to make the guitar speak in complete sentences with just a handful of notes. The album also showed Santana that maintaining artistic integrity within a successful band was possible. Green was not chasing trends, but following his muse, even as it led him into increasingly experimental territory. Green taught Santana that silence mattered as much as sound, and the spaces between notes gave them meaning. Green played with patience and trust that less could say more. This album became Santana's guide for balancing technical ability with emotional honesty. Finally, and perhaps surprisingly, Santana's own album, Abracas, from 1970, completed his musical education. This was not just Carlos Santana's masterpiece, but his arrival as a complete artist. Everything he had absorbed, every influence, lesson, and cultural thread finally wove itself into something completely new. This was not rock, jazz, or Latin music alone, but all of them simultaneously. It was purely Santana. Tracks like Black Magic Woman, Oye Como Va, and Samba Pati proved that fusion could be commercially successful without being artistically compromised. Santana took Fleetwood Mac's blues and gave it Afro-Cuban percussion. He took Tito Puente's mambo and electrified it. He channeled Coltrane's spirituality through an electric guitar. Somehow, impossibly, everything worked together. What made Abracas revolutionary was its confidence. Santana did not apologize for complexity, watered down rhythms, or hide his heritage. He placed conga drums next to distorted guitars and dared the world to call it anything but brilliant. The world agreed. This album taught Santana what his influences had been communicating all along, that authenticity resonates, that a person cannot fake their soul, and that the most powerful music comes from honoring everything you are without compromise. Carlos Santana transformed his influences into something miraculous. These 7 albums taught him that music transcends borders, genres, and expectations. His guitar became simultaneously a prayer, a celebration, and a revolution. Through careful listening and fearless experimentation, he created a musical voice that honored his diverse influences while remaining completely unique and unmistakably his own.